Today we have the chance to interview Professor Michael John. Since 1998, Professor John has been teaching science communication at Faculty of Medicine at the San Raffaele Institute in Milan. Moreover, he authored many books, mainly focused on strategies for a good science communication. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning to you.
Thank you for having accepted the invitation for this interview.
I'm honored and very pleased to do so.
You obtained a bachelor degree in Russian. How did you eventually bump into science communication?
Quite simply, because when I had been collaborating with the San Raffaele Hospital for numerous years. This was following my time as a teacher at the Catholic University in Milan, where I was basically a teacher of English language. I started collaborating after my time at the Cattolica, which sounds a bit like a jail sentence, however it wasn't, because it was very useful. In the mid-late 1990s, initially I was working with the clinical area, also the research area, but also with the administrative area. Then they asked me to work at the university, to teach at the university, when the university opened in the late 1990s, 1998, 1999. And of course, the problem initially was, what could I actually teach? Because I didn't think that it was particularly useful to teach students of medicine or biotechnology or whatever English language, because it seems to me that especially nowadays, young people, when they leave the high school, usually have some kind of preparation in English, so they don't need me to teach them things like the scalpel is on the table and things like that. So it seemed to me to be more useful to try to create a course where obviously I would be using the English language, which is the language of biomedicine, but the international language of biomedicine also, but putting it into a context where it would become a work instrument rather than simply a language to be looked at from the point of view of vocabulary and syntax and so on. So a fundamental role in this was played by Professor Claudio Ugarli, who is the great professor in this country, and not only of internal medicine. And Claudio Ugarli suggested, when I went to him, I must admit that I had the original idea to, after a while, because it took me a while to get around to this, to teach to the students, the undergraduate students, communication skills in the field of, initially, peer-to-peer communication, so how to write a paper, how to prepare a poster, how to speak at congresses, which now I've developed also into doctor-patient communication skills, which I do in the first year with the undergraduate students, and in the second year then we look at the peer-to-peer skills. And it varies, it depends upon the course, because obviously with the biotech students I don't talk to them about doctor-patient communication because they don't have patients, obviously, but it's something that has developed over the years, and it's taken a long time to get to this stage, and of course it hasn't finished yet, because I mean it's always work in progress, obviously.
Communication often is not regarded as an essential skill among researchers. Why do you think it is important for a scientist?
Because you need money to carry out research, and you cannot do anything without money, and the people that give you money are, at least as far as I know, the pharmaceutical companies, unless obviously you have the chance to get a grant from some governmental body or European Union body or whatever. It's pharmaceutical companies that you have to convince. And in order to convince these people, but in order also to convince other members of the community that your work is valid, you have to know how to communicate your ideas effectively, not only in a written form, for example in a paper, but also at a congress level, like posters for example, but also oral presentations. And I know it sounds a bit vulgar, because you're not selling sort of shoes or motorcycles or whatever, but it's similar. It's similar because also there's so much competition and there isn't enough money to go around. So if you're able to communicate effectively, then obviously you have an advantage.
So, if you have to summarize, what is the meaning of science communication? To convince or to share?
In an ideal world, I would definitely say to share. In practical terms, possibly to convince. Maybe it's a combination of the two. It depends who you have to communicate with. If you have to communicate with other members of the community, then it's definitely to share, obviously. But if you're speaking with pharmaceutical companies that have no idea even what you're talking about, then it's to convince them that you have a valid idea so they will eventually invest in your research.
In Italy, science communication is not integrated in the university program, in most of the cases. How is the situation in UK university, where you come from?
I've no idea. I've no idea firsthand. The only thing that I do know from feedback, I mean, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much of a network as far as communication skills are concerned. And this probably means that there is very little formal teaching of this kind, not only in Italy, not only in UK, but also in the rest of the world, because even the United States, where things tend to take off, that tend to be sort of laboratories for this type of research, they don't really seem to have much of an idea. Not so much how to do it, but how to test it. Because obviously we need to evaluate our students, because students at the end of a course need to do an examination or a test of some kind in order to get their credits, in order to continue with their careers. And I've had Americans coming to our university, because at the Vita Salute University I'm also the head of the medical humanities, which takes into consideration not only communication skills, but also I have people working on my humanities staff from the faculties of philosophy that teach bioethics, for example, people from psychology and so on. But I've had Americans asking me how we test the students. So it still seems to me that there doesn't really seem to be much of a structured idea as to how to do it. And you can see from many of the, let's say, clinicians, in my opinion, it's a very difficult and very delicate job to have to deal with and communicate with people or people's family members that are suffering from diseases that terrify them, and you can't just look at this individual as sort of individual here, illness over here, and the two things never meet, because of course that's not the case. Because if you have cancer, then you have cancer. It's not cancer over here and you over here, it's both things together, obviously. And doctors, clinicians very often don't take this into consideration. And even looking at from a researcher's point of view, I know that you have to be detached, otherwise you can't function. There's the danger of burnout and so on. And you cannot sort of totally empathize with everyone, otherwise you go crazy. But I also try to teach my biotech students, who will be researchers, therefore will be working in labs and will not be having contact as such with patients, that any work that they carry out also will eventually be to help people and not eventually to improve the lives of mice, for example. So honestly, it's difficult for me to answer your question about what happens in other countries, what happens in the UK, what happens in France, what happens in the United States, because unfortunately, I don't have much of a chance to go around and look, and you can't really get this kind of idea just by looking at the internet. The internet's not enough, because it's too detached. You have to sort of be there and sort of see what's going on to be able to appreciate what people are trying to do.
During the National PhD meeting 2014 Pesaro on October 24, you held a lecture entitled "Being Burnt Alive Comes Just Before Public Speaking on the Field Scale." Is it possible for both presenters and audiences to actually enjoy a Congress presentation? So, in your experience, which is the skill that is more important to develop?
I think that you have to show interest in what you're doing. If you're interested in what you're doing and you're interested in speaking to the audience and not just going there either to show off or to glorify your own person, in that case the audience will hopefully be able to also appreciate what you're trying to do. You mustn't just sort of talk about things in order to improve your curriculum or to be more highly considered by other members of the community. The reason why you go to events like this is to share your ideas, obviously. And I'm convinced that you have to show interest yourself in your topic before you can expect other people to be interested in this topic. Showing dynamism, passion. It's not sufficient just to have data. It's not sufficient just to have numbers. You need to have these things. You need to have a story to tell, otherwise you have nothing. And you can have, a total amount of passion, but if you've got nothing to speak about, then obviously it's no use whatsoever. But during the meeting, I have been impressed by the amount of passion that the young researchers are showing, which I find very heartening. And it's wonderful to be invited to be part of this kind of event, because nowadays, where we have an economic situation, social situation, where it seems much easier just to give up and become a rapper, for example, and just complain about things, and I have nothing against rappers, by the way. It's easy to be negative, but it's really difficult to be positive. And I've seen people really, really passionate about their research, which is a tough existence, which is really very impressive.
So thank you again, Professor John, for your suggestions and for sharing with us a different perspective about science. We hope to meet you again as a host of the Association of Cell Biology and Differentiation.
Thank you so much.